This is my beautiful healing space, JMS Wellbeing. But if you have watched The Jetty, you might recognise it.
You want to come to Ember World? It's a bit like Disney, but less fun.
Why are you here, Amber?
And I just wanted to share that with you because did you know that if you have not watched The Jetty, that it is actually used as a therapist room in the actual jetty as well, which I think is super cute. And I just wanted to share with you before we started today. But today's video, as you've probably seen from the title, is about autism and employment. And we know statistically the employment amongst autistic people is quite low. Like the employment rate is quite low. And I have a few personal answers as to why I think that is. I'm sure that you can find other takes of other people for what their own personal experiences with it, but I'm going to share with you mine today. So I'm just going to be really honest with you and tell you that my employment history has been incredibly choppy and changey. I never really stayed anywhere long. And I actually wondered many times, like, why? Why can I not stay in a job and other people seem to be able to stay in the job? Is it like a personal flaw of mine? And I've come to learn many things. Now I know myself a lot better than I previously did. But some of those jobs was unbearable for me. I then moved more into employment that was more bearable for me, that I learned a lot, I gained a lot from. And now I am in self-employment where I get to mold it to my clients' needs, absolutely, but also my personal needs and my personal capacity. So I'm going to delve into that with you today. So I actually started working before 16, although that is illegal now. And I started serving, and my anxiety just could not. Like the shaking of the holding the trays was unbearable. So then I moved over to pot washing. Pot washing actually was surprisingly good because I was just in my own zone. I was actually with a sister, working with a sister friend, and she was a sister and a friend, just to make that clearer for people who might just be like, what the hell are you talking about? And I didn't really have to talk. And if I did, it was to somebody that I was extremely comfortable with and I could just zone out, put my earphones in and just pot wash. And that was actually fun and fine. And the only thing that I didn't like about that job is the shouting of the chefs behind me. And I still remember that vividly and how it felt in my body. But now I understand that that is my sensory profile. Not just the shouting, but the volume of the shouting. Because sometimes it was like fun shouting, but I still did not enjoy that. And then I moved over into working a game. And I love this. I actually love this because I was working with guys. So there was not the same element of bitching that there was because I just worked in retail for years and years, that there was when I worked in like retail shops, like which was like clothing shops that was predominantly female. I really struggled with that. And it was not me judging them when I say this. It's more that I just can't, and I still cannot fathom, why are we talking about people? Like, what are you getting out of that? Like, I get nothing out of that. Like, I don't want to partake in this, which naturally isolates me, naturally makes me seem the odd one out, makes me seem like I'm doing something fundamentally wrong. And I'm just really struggling to gel. At this point, my mental health just plummeted. My depression magnified to a level that up until this point, I'm about 18 here. I've never had it that bad. I've had it worse since, and I've not had it bad for a long time, but it was magnified, and it was definitely due to purpose, and it was definitely due to employment. And I really struggled with that. And I just thought, why can't I? Like, all these other people have been there years, they're enjoying it, and I'm not enjoying it. And I'm not saying you have to enjoy your job, but there are certain fundamental things that I could just not get past. I then ended up going back to college. And then I started, after qualifying from college and university, I started working in schools. I found this more bearable, and I realize now why this is, but I didn't at the time. I was actually working with autistic students who I just understood, and I got it, and I understood why they worked the way that they worked and why they thought the way that they thought and how they operated. And although there was some staff that was great and some staff that was not so great, and they was a struggle, I felt like I had purpose. I felt like I was making a difference to these kids. I felt like the kid, at least they had somebody who understood them and had somebody who was advocating for them. And I enjoyed my job. And that was kind of the same all the way through working through education. However, some of the same things came up in relation to employment. The first one being the lack of individuality and autonomy is something that I struggled with immensely. The idea that even if the thing is wrong, we just have to go along with it because that is what we do, and how that is just pushed in so many forms of employment. And if I, because it's who I am, say, but can you explain to me why we're doing that? Because that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm seen as rude, I'm seen as confrontational, I'm seen as difficult, when it just doesn't make sense. So, an example could be that all the children have to have their coat off. And I'm like, okay, but sometimes we're moving from building to building. It it doesn't give them the autonomy that you trust them and that you can just ask them to take it off when they come in the classroom where it's warmer. It was just no, 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 no. They have to have it off at all times. They're in the school building now, but then they're moving from building to building. And so I worked in one school where there was just one building, but for the most part, high school still had multiple buildings. So the other ones that I worked in, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So then I would be asked as a member of staff to deliver that nonsense. And I could not get on board with it. The resistance inside of me, the stress inside of me, because ultimately these students often felt very safe with me, that they could speak to me about anything. And they'd say, yeah, but miss, why? Like, I've got to go back out to put it back on, and I'm not allowed to. Why can't I just keep it on until I get into my classroom? I'll take it off. And I didn't have an answer for them. Or if they said to me, can we take our blazers off because it's the middle of summer, and the staff hadn't decided yet that they're allowed to, I have to back that up. Or why are we not allowed a haircut that's a number one or lower than a number one? And I had to just back it up. But I didn't have any justifiable reason to explain to them why, because it was never explained to me why. And this is one of the huge barriers that I had. And then the idea that doing it a certain way was expected of me, even if it was against my moral code. An example being, I was given a group of students who apparently was using the race card. And they was like, you need, because you're a person of color, obviously, and you're the only person who could potentially do this without it seeming racist, you need to basically stop them doing that. So I was like, okay, like if they're actually doing that, then that's fair and that's fine. And I absolutely can, speak to them about that. But what if they're not lying? How do we know they're fundamentally lying? Why are we assuming that they're lying? So when I spoke to them, there was a couple of ones that I'm just like, okay, I think that naturally, you're probably more sensitive, and I understand why you're more sensitive because I am the same and I've been the same, and I get that if somebody's off with you, it's natural to assume that if you're not doing it with anyone else but you're doing it with me, is it my race? But there's nothing like fundamentally like concrete about it. But then there was some that was fundamentally concrete. And when I would pose that to staff, when I would challenge the member of staff for doing it, when I would challenge the kind of SLT and say, yeah, but actually they're not lying about the situation and they're not using the race card. This is actually questionable behaviour from members of staff. I was a problem. I was backing up students when I should be backing up staff. And these are just some examples of things that I cannot. So I can be quiet for so long, but it never leaves my body. It's like it's eating me from the inside out. And I just cannot. I cannot back up things that make no sense. On to my second point, which is the inability to be able to deal with injustice. I've been strong on injustice since I can remember. I always say this, but I feel like I switched on your line very young. And from about 3, I had a very strong sense of right and wrong and a sense of justice, that everybody should be treated fairly. So when you see like favoritism, whether it's favorite employee or whether it's favorite student or whether it's based off their academic ability rather than just, treating them all the same or treated on whether you like them because they remind you of somebody, I cannot get on board with that. That was something that I really struggled with personally. And these are things that, for the most part, most people can brush off. I could not, and I cannot brush that off. So it becomes a struggle for me to stay in employment when these things are happening. And I never understood that previously why that was. But now it's all starting to make sense. Another thing that is a natural consequence of that is that people begin to dislike me. So that is also a difficult thing for anybody. Whether you can imagine you being at school, in the middle of a family, middle of a work situation, well, no matter where you are, if you are being disliked regularly due to the way you are, the way that you operate, it's not going to feel comfortable. Even if you know why it's happening, even if you can fathom that, oh, okay, everybody's in agreement with that thing, but actually I'm not. So that's why this is happening. However, I can't also stop that part of myself. And that's something else that I think that I definitely see the pattern of in pretty much all employments. And sometimes it's not like bullying or it's nothing like being deliberately targeted. Sometimes it's just like an ostracization, just of like, you just don't belong to us. Like you don't operate like we operate. You don't think like we think. You don't seem to be able to include yourself in the way that we just naturally all gel together, which is fair because it's true. So naturally, that's also something else that means that I never really got to stay in employment for long periods of time. And I'm not ever talking about being sacked. Remember, I'm a very, very strong rule follower in the sense of I follow them to a T. So I don't do anything that is a fireable offense, but I do things and work and operate in ways in which I don't necessarily gel to everybody or to certain dynamics or certain systems that other people can seem to operate inside of that I can't. And that was something that is in every single employment that I've had. Another thing, which kind of ties in with the first thing, is that sometimes I just don't see the point. Like, yeah, but why? Why are we doing that? And again, I'm not questioning. I want you to make it make sense to me. Then I can get on board with it and I can operate it and I can support it, I can back it up. But like, why are we doing that thing? Like, why are we doing things that make things unnecessary? Example, I remember I would come in 15 minutes earlier to meet a student to help them feel comfortable, settle into the day. But they left early, so sometimes I would leave 5 to 3 minutes early. And the one that I got pulled up on was 3 minutes early. I left 3 minutes early and I got pulled in. And it said, if you keep doing it, we'll dock your wage. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm 50 minutes early. Yeah, but you don't have to do that, which I did if I was doing my job properly. And you have to stay until a allotted time. But I'm like, yeah, but the person that I'm working with is leaving. So like, what's the point? Things like that, they just don't make sense to me. And I get the generalization of like, yeah, but we couldn't do that with everybody. But I'm always of a mindset like, if I can fit my work into a certain amount of time and I'm still completing all the work that is expected of me, make that make sense to me. Because I know that if I was running a business and somebody had finished their work, as long as they've done everything that was expected of them, that are being paid to do, wouldn't bother me one bit. But it's like a control thing that I just can't deal with. Another thing is the levels of hierarchy that exist in all employment, and how I've just never seen them. I never saw them at school. I've never seen them in a family dynamic. I've never seen them in an employment dynamic. Yes, you might have a job that, is managerial or senior leadership or whatever it might be, owner, but I treat you with respect, you treat me with respect. And if you don't, then my disrespect has now been earned because I don't mean like I'm going to be again difficult or non-rule following. What I mean, or in my mind, but what I mean is that I'm not going to do any sort of brown nosing. You couldn't get me to do it to try to gain a higher role. You couldn't get me to do it because of this system I'm not in agreement with. Like, I will treat the person who is the cleaner at the end of the day cleaning the school with the same level of respect that I treat my manager, because why wouldn't I, in my mind? And again, it's all to do with the way that I think and the way that I operate. But for so many people, they don't. They say they do, but they actually don't. And that's something else I just can't get my head around. That you say you do, but the way that you just spoke to the cleaner about being on her phone in a break doesn't suggest that you do, but it's okay if the manager pulls out the phone in the middle of a meeting. Make it make sense to me, because it doesn't. And I will pull it into the light, and I will say, but help it make sense to me, because that is just fundamentally wrong and flawed in my opinion, which leads to all the other things like being disliked. But yeah, that's just another one. Another thing that I really struggle with is doing a role, or being expected to do a role that is outside of the agreed set of. And I know they like to keep it vague when they give you a job description, just so they can include this, which again, uh, but when they start to add additional expectations of you that are outside of your agreed role. And the reason I have difficulty with this is task change. I struggle with task change. I have to almost have a mindset for each thing that I do, and it takes a lot of energy reserve. So asking me to just switch it up is really difficult for me. But also, that's not what I'm employed to do, and that's not what I was employed to do. So why am I doing that? And why am I being expected to do that? And then you're not seen as a team player because you're not doing that. Ugh. Yeah, it's a struggle. I don't really like that. And I think that a lot of roles now expect that of you. I think that they expect you to be paid the same wage. This feels like a bit of a rant, but be paid the same wage whilst they keep increasing the workload of expectation on you. And I'm not. I am not a willing participant in that at all. And then I'd say the final point is something I've seen for myself and other people too, is that often people with autism in particular, but maybe it exists in other things too, they often have to work below skill level because they're not able to operate. So, say for example, they're in a job like mine where this is my skill level, like this is what my bread and butter, I'm so good at this. But they almost have to take a job that is lesser or lesser or lesser than the particular role that they'd be really good at, because they need to do the role that they're particularly good at in a certain way. And it has to be accommodated and adapted to in a certain way, like I can do now in self-employment. I cannot increase my workload because it's just not optimal for me, and it's not optimal for my clients. I keep at a certain capacity. I also have well-being days because I can, and it helps me be optimal. It helps my business be optimal. It helps my clients get optimal resources out of me, help out of me, support out of me, healing from the actual experience. But because you're not able to, I am able to do that, but because you're not always able to do that, you have to kind of take something below your skill level, your intellectual level, because you have to have less demand job. And it is not great. It's not right, because basically the additional stresses that come with the role as you move up, even though that is your level and your intellectual level, the extra demands and the extra expectations mean that you are a lot more likely to hit burnout or not be able to function, or end up having to deal with other elements that are the harder elements to deal with, but not the actual skills that you have. If that makes any sense. Whereas now, I'm in a position where I get to consider all these things. And I'm not suggesting that anybody does this. I know that my husband says to me that he couldn't run his own business. He prefers to be paid, one, because it's regular and consistent income, but two, because it feels reliable and safe for him. And I understand that. And that's what many people feel like. But so I'm not encouraging it in any way. But what I am saying is that I don't have those same level of conditions that I worry about. But I do know that in order for me to be a good mum, to be a good wife, to be a good friend, to be a good therapist, I actually need things to be in a certain way. And I could never go backwards now. I don't think I could. Maybe this will change in years to come. But I don't think I could ever go back to employment now. Not because I'm not good at the role, but because of all the additional things that come with it that make it really hard as an autistic person. Tell me your experience, what your thoughts are on this, and what your experience is. Speak soon.